Hello and welcome. You're watching NDTV World with me, Aditi Bhardwaj. Let's take a look at the top stories here that we are tracking at this hour. Lebanon's Hezbollah militant group appoints Naim Qassem as its new Secretary General, replacing Hassan Nasrallah, who was killed in Israeli airstrikes. Amid Israel-Hamas war, UK expresses serious concern after Israel's parliament votes to ban UN's Palestinian Refugee Agency. Amid Israeli airstrikes, Iran's foreign minister speaks out, says Iran will neither delay nor rush its response to Israel's first ever open attack on his country. As per a new report, China is considering approving next week the issuance of over $1.4 trillion in extra debt in the next few years to revive its fragile economy. US presidential candidate Kamala Harris speaks in DC, makes case against Trump in closing pitch, says her presidency will be different. Lebanon's Hezbollah militant group has appointed Naim Qassem as its new Secretary General, replacing Hassan Nasrallah, who was killed in an Israeli airstrike last month. Qassem, a long-time deputy to Nasrallah, has been serving as the group's acting leader since the assassination. Qassem's election was confirmed by Hezbollah's decision-making Shura Council, solidifying his position as the new leader. Now, with over 3 decades of experience as Nasrallah's deputy, Qassem is well-versed in the group's ideology and operations. For more on this, I am being joined by Irina Sakhamen for more details and to deal into discussion. She is a geopolitical analyst. Thank you so much, Irina, for joining us at this hour.
Thank you so much for the invitation.
Irina, let me begin by asking you, why do you think it took Hezbollah so long to decide on a successor after Hassan Nasrallah's killing in an Israeli airstrike, which was last month? It took at least a month for Hezbollah to find out a successor.
Well, I think one of the reasons is that this job has become extremely dangerous, and the nominees and candidates have been getting killed one after another. It may be that not many people wanted that job or were in any way qualified to take it.
Right. Irina, what factors favored Naim Qassem to be the leader of Hezbollah now? What distinguished him from the others?
Well, he survived. He survived by being a bureaucrat. He's been a number 2 in that position since the 80s, when Hassan Nasrallah was appointed as the leader, and had Hassan Nasrallah survived, he would have probably been number 2 forever. He's considered sort of a great bureaucratic management type, not at all charismatic or inspiring, loyal, dedicated, extremely trusted, but not in any way a visionary or somebody who is seen as a natural leader, which is why he ended up in this position of an assistant. He may have been shaping a lot of the policy, but he was not the one who was seen as a spiritual pillar or an effective spokesperson or somebody who inspired a great following of people. He joined Hezbollah from its inception. He knew how the entire organization was formed. He knows about all the skeletons in the closet. In some ways, he could be seen as a gray cardinal of the organization, whereas Hassan Nasrallah was its charismatic leader. But at the same time, he was not someone who. He was someone who is best suited to lead from behind, to contribute quietly, precisely because of that lack of effective image that could, with information warfare and propaganda, playing such an important role in Hezbollah's both political and military activities.
Right. Irina, we have seen how Israel has been carrying out targets, and Israeli strikes have been very precise in targeting opponent leaders. How is Hezbollah planning to protect Naim Qassem, or do we know about his whereabouts, considering how Hassan Nasrallah was eliminated? Naim Qassem now can be already on the target of Israeli strikes.
Not only is it possible, but it's a certainty. Gallant tweeted a picture of Naim Qassem and basically said it's a temporary job, and that he basically has a target on his head. That may be part of the reason why Iran was very reluctant to disclose the identity of the new leader too. They were trying to figure out the best way, first of all, to ensure that he was not in fact one of those high-level spies that Israel had recruited, and second, to ensure that they could communicate with him effectively and safely and prevent him from being found out the same way Nasrallah was eventually betrayed and lured into a trap.
Right. Thank you so much, Irina, for joining us and sharing those details.
Thank you.
Now, moving on, several countries, including the US and the UK, have expressed serious concern about Israel's move to ban UN's Palestinian Refugee Agency. Israel's parliament has voted to pass legislation banning the UN's Palestinian Refugee Agency from operating within Israel and occupied East Jerusalem, accusing the organization of colluding with Hamas in Gaza. Now, contact between the agency employees and Israeli officials will be banned within 3 months, severely limiting the agency's ability to operate in Gaza and the Israeli-occupied West Bank. Cooperation with the Israeli military, which controls all crossings into Gaza, is essential for the UN agency to transfer aid into the territory. It is the main UN organization working on the ground there. Listen in to the Israeli ambassador to the UN.
My colleagues, it is legitimate to criticize Israel, to debate the subjects, but it is entirely illegitimate to ignore, dismiss, or blind oneself to what stands so plainly before us. It is neither illegitimate nor moral to disregard the undeniable fact that UNRWA Gaza has become a front for Hamas. And yet, that is precisely what the Secretary General is doing. We will continue to work with the UN. We will continue to work with UN organs who are focused on humanitarian assistance to the Palestinians, but not in terrorism. We are proving that that's pure terrorism. You have WHO, UNICEF, World Food Programme, dozens of NGOs that operate today in Gaza. We will continue to work with them, but we will not continue to work with UNRWA after what we just exposed.
And now, amid Israeli airstrikes, Iran's foreign minister has stressed his country will neither delay nor rush its response to Israel's first ever open attack on his country. Iran's foreign minister vowed Israel will face consequences for the attack during a meeting with foreign diplomats in Tehran. Israel attacked military targets in Iran with pre-dawn airstrikes on Saturday in retaliation for the barrage of ballistic missiles Iran fired on Israel earlier this month. The Israeli military said its aircraft targeted facilities that Iran used to make the missiles fired at Israel, as well as surface-to-air missile sites. And with that, we're slipping into a very short break, but keep watching NDTV. Now, as per an international news agency, China is considering approving next week the issuance of over $1.4 trillion in extra debt in the next few years to revive its fragile economy, a fiscal package which is expected to be further bolstered if Donald Trump wins the US election. China's top legislative body, the Standing Committee of the National People's Congress, is looking to approve the fresh fiscal package, including 6 trillion yuan, which would partly be raised via special sovereign bonds on the last day of a meeting to be held from November 4th to 8th. Now, China to raise fresh debt via special treasury, local government bonds. Package includes 6 trillion yuan to address local government debt risk, China will approve up to 4 trillion bonds for idle land property purchase. Beijing may announce stronger fiscal package if Trump wins November 5 election. I'm also being joined by Professor Avinash Godbole, who is an expert on matters pertaining to China. Thank you so much, Professor, for joining us.
Thank you.
Professor, if you can throw some light, how do you think it will help China?
See, there are basically three drivers of China's economy: external investment, foreign trade, and domestic production and consumption. All three have gone down significantly over the last 1 year. They had hoped that post-COVID recovery in China would be fast enough, but it has not happened. I have spoken with some of the professors and academics who have been to China last year, and they have said that Chinese society is experiencing a social COVID. People are not willing to spend their money, so consumption has also gone down. And with the housing crisis, which was almost like a growth driver for domestic economy, almost 30% of the GDP going down, people are worried even more. Banking crisis has been on, has a cycle there. There's a crisis in 2015. Once again, there's a banking crisis going on. So people don't know where to save their money or where to invest their money. That's why they need this form of economic stimulus right now. And the data that came out at the end of September, the large enterprises are not making profit in China. The only sector that is making profit in China is the new energy, the lithium-ion batteries, solar, and electric vehicles that they make for themselves and elsewhere. But the global slowdown is also going to affect demand for that. Plus, like you mentioned, the potential election of Donald Trump, and there's a possibility of slowdown plus further trade war. So that these are the causes that will push this round of stimulus.
Professor, if you can throw some light, what factors played against China that brought its economy to this stage that they have to now approve a fiscal package to revive its economy? What lessons also, if you can, beg your pardon, what lessons also what other nations can take from China's stage?
Well, Chinese over-depended on the Western consumption for their markets.
Right.
So they got stuck in the method that they were used to. But for last 10 years, their political leaders have been making these announcements that our economy is unstable, unsustainable if we continue down this path. They had also announced something called dual circulation right at the start of COVID to increase domestic consumption, to reduce domestic business competition and bottlenecks. The interprovincial competition is quite high. The bottlenecks are high. Red tapeism has returned in China, and that also has not worked. So there are a mix of factors. People not willing to spend, the investments not returning as rapidly as they did, and the world facing slowdown and the trade war. China actually oversold its rise as a power before COVID and during COVID. And then the world has become more and more wary of China as well. So there are several factors that come together for why China's economy has gone down so rapidly as it has.
Professor Avinash, let's talk about China and India bilateral ties as well. They are also improving. Will China, is China eyeing more trade with India to improve its economy?
Yes, and that has also been a part of problem. India has wanted investments from China. There were several agreements signed in 2014 and 2015 when Xi Jinping came to India and Prime Minister Modi went to China, but not many of them have fructified. There was an investment treaty about producing creating a railway university, about electrical machinery factory in Orissa. There was an agreement about a truck factory coming to Maharashtra. But as you know, none of that have really fructified. Chinese really want to do business. They don't want to do long-term investments in India. And that has been the part of the problem. I hope and I believe that the government will undertake measures to address that.
Right. Thank you so much, Professor Avinash, for joining us and sharing those details.
Thank you.
The NASDAQ composite hit a new record high in Tuesday's trading session as Wall Street indices continue to remain mixed ahead of big tech results and the outcome of the US presidential elections. Investors are also anticipating the first preliminary reading of the US GDP on Wednesday, where the consensus forecast is of a 3.1% growth, indicating a 10th straight quarter of expansion. Among big tech, Microsoft and Facebook parent Meta Platforms will be reporting results today. Now, Vice President Kamala Harris speaking to tens of thousands where former President Donald Trump fired up the Jan 6 mob, said he has tried to keep Americans divided and afraid of one another. But she added that it is not who we are. Vice President Kamala Harris delivered her closing argument for an election just 1 week away, urging the nation to move beyond violent division and to stop pointing fingers and start locking arms for a future of shared responsibility. It is time, she said, for America to reject the schemes of wannabe dictators and to start writing the next chapter in the most extraordinary story ever told. Listen in.
America, for too long, we have been consumed with too much division, chaos, and mutual distrust. And it can be easy then to forget a simple truth. It doesn't have to be this way. It doesn't have to be this way. It is time to stop pointing fingers. We have to stop pointing fingers and start locking arms. It is time to turn the page on the drama and the conflict, the fear and division. It is time for a new generation of leadership in America. And I am ready to offer that leadership as the next President of the United States of America.
A week to go until polls close, and this was Kamala Harris's big chance to offer her final pitch to voters. Tens of thousands of people attended this rally, one focused on a future of freedom and hope, key themes in her campaign. But this speech was just as much about symbolism as it was about substance. The location, we're a stone's throw from the White House, the timing, a week out, the focus on those themes of freedom, big signs of USA, American flags waving, sending that message that ultimately she is putting country, she says, above party. She drew a stark contrast between herself and Donald Trump, someone she labelled as, quote, a wannabe dictator, someone that represents chaos and division, she says, referencing the January 6th, 2021 attack on the US Capitol building. It was, of course, this location where Donald Trump gave his speech that day. She presented herself, alternatively, as a unifier, someone that can bring people together, and she'll be a president for all Americans. That was lapped up by those that attended here in Washington, D.C. tonight, but her mission would have been to reach out to the handful of undecided voters in those battleground states that could swing this election that is still very much on a knife edge. Benji Haya, NDTV, Washington.
Now, former President Donald Trump and Vice President Kamala Harris are in a nearly tied race, according to a new poll by Reuters Ipsos out Tuesday. The poll of 1,150 adults nationwide, including 975 registered voters, conducted over 3 days ending Sunday, showed Harris leading Trump 44% to 43%. Now, the elections are just 1 week away, and these reports are coming out where it is a tight race between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. Who will win the elections? That will be decided on November 5. Keep watching NDTV for a special report. Now, just a week before Election Day, Steve Bannon, former White House chief strategist in the Trump administration, was released from federal prison after serving 4 months for contempt of Congress when he refused to cooperate with the House Select Committee investigating the Jan 6 Capitol attack. The 4 months in federal prison not only didn't break me, it empowered me, he said after being released from the prison. And with that, it's a wrap on this news edition. Keep watching NDTV.